Watching Beyond Markets, welcome. I'm Kenneth Ibomo. On today's show, we'll discuss Africa's growth potential as the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa explains findings from their report. Later on, we'll focus on the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement and its expected impact on the African economy. You can join the conversation with the hashtag Beyond Markets, and you can also follow my handle too at Kenneth Igbomo. Now, as part of activities for the week-long 52nd session of the Economic Commission for Africa in Marrakech in Morocco, the 2019 Economic Report for Africa was launched. CNBC Africa's Fifi spoke to Vera Songwe, the Executive Secretary for the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, about the findings from the report and the degree to which South Africa and Nigeria were weighing on Africa's growth potential.
Of course, when we talk about the continent, we always bring all the countries together. When we talk about average growth rates, which we're now talking about, we talk about 3.2% overall for Africa, with possibility of going to maybe 3.5 by the end of the year 2020. We would like much better, but clearly what ends up happening, Nigeria used to grow at 7%, and Nigeria used to pull the rest of the economy together. For the 10 years between 2000 and 2012, when Africa was growing at 6-7%, we always used to say without South Africa, because when you added the average growth of South Africa, it took that number down. However, I think 2 or 3 things are happening in our largest growing economies. One of them is South Africa has signed the CFTA. And the whole point of the CFTA is to say that we want to create regional value chains, which will allow for not just one country to pull the growth, but sub-regions, and why not the whole continent. And so we really believe that part of how we get to double-digit growth, we need double-digit growth to be able to get the investments that we need to pull the economy. And most importantly, I think when we talk about growth, we really want to talk about, growth per capita. How much more resources is each person earning? How much more access does each person have? How much more opportunity do we create? And I think with the Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, we realize that this will just give a lot more people a lot more opportunity, a lot more value addition, and a lot more work. And so your question, is it about the 2 largest economies? Yes, but it's mostly about the whole continent. It is about how the whole continent can come together to say, where are the value addition areas, where are the points where we do particularly well, and how can we then ensure that we can do better in those areas, so that today when you look at Kenya and Rwanda, people are going back and forth on the ICT space. So it's one large economy and one not so large economy, but together they're pulling each other, because in each of those economies there is value that can be created because of the assets that exist in those economies. So what we would like for Nigeria and South Africa to do, South Africa has already done it, they are in the CFTA, we hope that Nigeria will come along, is that they can then federate and leverage the assets that the rest of the continent has to go faster and further, and that will in turn take the rest of the continent with them.
Worst case scenario, and Nigeria doesn't come along, what then does that mean for Africa's ambitions, or the ECA's ambitions, to achieve the double-digit growth rates that you keep emphasizing is necessary for us to meet the Agenda 2030 Sustainable Development Goals?
We're convinced Nigeria will come along, because Nigeria has one of the largest productive bases on the continent. Nigeria, I think, stands to gain more than most of the other economies. Nigeria's private sector stands to gain most from a CFTA, Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, that allows Nigeria's big businesses to have access to 1.2 billion people on the continent. I think that what we need to do, and do more, is talk a little bit more with the Nigerians about the benefits of the Free Trade Area Agreement, to see how Nigeria can benefit from that. I think just recently in the news we saw that Nigeria is now the largest producer of rice on the continent. They will start exporting. I think as Nigeria improves its internal competitiveness, it will automatically see the benefits of something like the CFTA. Today, one of the largest exporters of cement is Nigerian. They have brought down prices across the continent because they can produce cement using global value chains on the continent. I think that is proof that when Nigerian business people decide to sort of federate and leverage the assets of the rest of the continent, they do much better than when they just stay in Nigeria. So we are convinced that the CFTA is good for Nigeria, and they will join the rest of the continent and pull us all up.
All right, now the continent has got a big funding needs, and quite often you find that the role players go outside to raise money. You painted quite an interesting picture about how leveraging our resources and using them a lot better and more efficiently, Africa can essentially come out with a big part of its funding needs. Can you just put the picture or list the figures there for us, exactly how this could work?
ECA has just done a study, and thank you very much for asking the question. We have just done a study on our recent economic report on Africa. Is essentially on fiscal policy for sustainable development. And what we show in that report is that basically Africa can collect 12 to 22% more revenue in GDP, 12 to 22% of GDP additional revenue, if we actually did better. When we talk about 12 to 22% of GDP, it sounds like a number, but just to break it down for you, 12% of Africa's GDP is about $230 billion. $230 billion a year is more than what we need to power all of the continent. We know that if we have more access to energy on the continent, we add 1 to 1.6 percentage points in our growth. Talking about double-digit growth, it means we can take our own resources and ensure by providing just energy. We also show in the report that we don't necessarily need as a continent to provide tax breaks to investment. We just need to provide energy. So you collect taxes, you give them energy, you don't give any tax breaks, so you get more taxes, and then you can build the roads and you can build the hospitals and the schools that we need. So I think what the report is showing essentially is Africa continues to be Africa's largest funder for development because we collect taxes. But we are not collecting as much as we would need to. Today, our average tax rate to GDP is somewhere between 16 to 20%. We need to be about 35%, 25 to 35% if we really want to grow as fast as the East Asian countries grew. But what our report shows and what is really positive about it is that we know what we need to do and how we need to do it using digital technology. Countries like Rwanda, again, countries like South Africa have, with the use of digital technology, been able to increase their tax collection. So they haven't increased the rates. They've just done better at how they administer the process. And so administration is an important part of it. We show that better governance, one, of foreign firms, especially in countries that are resource rich, we can almost save $99 billion just by improving, base erosion and price shifting, which is essentially that companies sort of, mine our resources, but then sort of account for them in a third jurisdiction outside of the continent, so they don't pay taxes on the continent. If we were able to sort of bring that to fore, bring a lot more transparency to some of our mining and resource-rich companies, we will be able to collect more taxes. So we know what to do, we know how to do it. I think what we're looking for now is better leadership and improved governance in these processes. And so the good news is we have the resources, we can actually go after them, and if we did, we can get to double-digit growth much faster than we would expect without necessarily looking for new sources of resources. And more importantly, we've also seen that when we do good fiscal policy, which is the way we tax, we bring more investments in. So we don't need to do tax breaks. And right now on the continent, many countries think, doing a tax break is better because it will attract investment. I think we heard this morning from many countries that even after doing tax breaks, people didn't come. We heard from Morocco that they had, Tangier was a tax-free zone. And for many years, nobody invested in Tangier. But the minute they brought water, the minute they brought electricity, and the minute they put an airport there, they're getting fourfold the number of investment that they need. So it's those kinds of messages that the report is talking about. We don't need to get out of the continent to find good examples. They're all here with us. We just need to find leadership that is willing to put them in.
And that's the thing. So you said that the plan going forward now is about taking those great ideas and making them into action. Yet we have seen for a very long time how the continent does not walk its talk. How then do you think that things are going to be different this time around?
I am optimistic for two reasons. The first one is with the CFTA, we are walking the talk. The CFTA will be one of the first protocols that the AU has passed, which will be ratified hopefully within a year of its passage, or a little bit over a year of its passage, because yesterday was the anniversary of the signing in Kigali. But we are going to have the meeting in July, and by July we would have our 22. So the continent is beginning to realize that it is, one, possible to walk the talk and beneficial to walk the talk. We have 16 million youth that are looking for jobs. And we have two choices. We can either give them jobs, create instability or create a lot of concerns around migration and losing them in the oceans. And I think that our leadership is beginning to realize that we have options that are much better than the options that our youth are taking. We can actually provide the 16 million jobs if we can create the right governance environments for that. So I am optimistic that we will go forward. The second reason is, hitherto we needed to go out and look at what Singapore was doing or what Indonesia was doing. Now we can look at what South Africa is doing, what Rwanda is doing, what Burkina Faso is doing, what Mauritania is doing. We have the examples on the continent. We don't need to go out to. And then with the CFTA, it's a 1.2 billion market. We have the youngest population on the earth on our continent. We are the investment destination. Anybody who wants to make additional value has to come to the continent. So I think that the stars are aligned. We just need that leadership now to take advantage. And we do have, I think, increasingly a sense that there is an awareness that one can take advantage of the positives on the continent.
And that was Vera Songwe, the Executive Secretary for the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. After